Hi, welcome back to our talk, and I'm Yating. Today, I'm gonna have a discussion with two friends and just more like a free-flow conversation, discuss about our research experience, and our researches are all related to contemporary geopolitics and the situation in Europe and the relation between the US and Europe, Russia, and China. So first, I would like to briefly introduce myself. My name is Yating. I'm a PhD candidate at Free University of Berlin. My research focuses on China's economic reform. I'm a historian. I studied China's economic reform since the end of 1970s and 1990s. I mainly used archives from Germany and China and some digital archives from the US. So, and my PhD project is about how West Germany participates in China's economic reform. So now the floor is yours.
Yeah, I can maybe introduce. So it's a little bit hybrid. So I don't know. It's kind of hybrid format for me as well. So my name is Dimitri. I just finished my master's in political science and North American studies as well. And my research interests include U.S.-Russia relations and the West-Russia relations, but also the process of identity formation. And I would just say, I just have many other also interests that kind of coincide with the topic of Russia-West relations, because it's a very broad topic in itself. And I also have a podcast, and I guess I'm also aspiring academic as well. Yeah, I guess that's it. That would be enough information.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Chaoting Chen. Same as both of you, I'm doing my PhD study at Free University of Berlin. My research topic is about China's Belt and Road Initiative and the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States. Actually, my research interests are geopolitics, international relations, and strategy, as well as grand strategy. My research interests are quite traditional. Before my PhD study, I have worked for one telecommunications company in China, India, Africa, and finally Germany. But I want to study international relations and strategy. That's why I decided to resign. So this is my situation. So today it's my great pleasure to discuss with both of you about some grand topics, although we are small persons. Okay, so this is my situation.
Okay.
So your experience is actually very interesting. But I think it's the first time in our podcast that we discussed our own experience as well as our own research experience. So do you want to start with why you are interested in geopolitics studies? I mean, since I know that you work in many years in Africa, and then it sounds like you earned a lot of money during your work, and you finally gave up this high-paid job. Why? I'm quite curious. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I think geopolitics has a negative reputation in Germany, but in other countries like China, Russia, and the US, I think geopolitics is a normal science. Actually, when I was very young, I always read a newspaper, Chinese newspaper. The Chinese name is 参考消息. Okay, in English, it can be called as reference news something. Actually, this newspaper is very important for Chinese people to know the outside world. Actually, in the past, China was a closed country. People have no many experience with the outside world. We have very limited means to understand the outside world. But I think the newspaper 参考消息 is an important way for Chinese people to get information about other countries, about the international relations. I read the newspaper when I was very young, so I'm very interested in the outside world because I live in one closed country. So I have always told myself when I am old enough, I want to go abroad. I want to explore as much as possible. Not in China, but in other countries, even in Africa, Latin American. I don't care, but I want to work and live in foreign countries. So this is my personal interest. But I had no experience to be engaged in the traditional foreign policy. So you have to work for foreign ministry or for defense ministry. I have no such chance. I have to work to make money, okay, to feed myself and my family. So that's my story. But when I worked for this company in many different countries, as I have mentioned, in China, India, Africa, and Europe, then I have the possibility to study at one German university. I think this is my lucky. Okay, I'm very lucky that I have opportunity to study at one German famous university, and now I have the chance to do a PhD study to research some important topic. For me, it's an important topic. So, so this is my situation. This is why I'm interested in geopolitics, international relations, as well as a grand strategy. So, and it's also my great pleasure to discuss with both of you, because it's very difficult to find the people who have similar interests in geopolitics or international relations. I think in Germany, as I have mentioned earlier, geopolitics has a negative reputation because of the history. Maybe geopolitics has been used by Nazis for their expansion. That's why after World War II, geopolitics has had a very negative image or reputation in Germany. But I think geopolitics is important, especially now. Geopolitics is returning. I think the great powers are playing geopolitics. China, Russia, United States, even Europe. In the past, European countries perceive themselves as a normative power rather than a geopolitical actor. But now the situation has changed. In Europe now, we are seeing one large-scale war between Russia and Ukraine, actually since 2014, okay? So we are seeing one ground war, and geopolitics has a role to play. And as well, as far as I know, the president of European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has said EU wants to be a geopolitical player, okay, not a playground, okay, a player. So this means geopolitics, the importance of geopolitics has been recognized by the European politicians, decision makers, policy makers. We are ordinary people, but we should understand the world. I think if we understand the world better, then we can have a clear direction of our own lives. Okay, every day, if you look at the newspaper, if you watch the TV, there are so many things, very complicated. But if you have geopolitical knowledge, I think you can understand today's world better than others. This can guide even your personal life. I think geopolitics makes sense. This is my understanding.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, it's a very interesting experience. I think it's quite fascinating that you gave up your happy job and then you just devoted your time and your energy into geopolitics studies. Also, I feel kind of same since even though I only study in Germany for like 4 years, and then I feel that you barely find some people who study like geopolitics or like strategy studies here, such as like in this graduate school. I think most people study like social studies, gender studies, or it's like Asian studies, yeah. So I think it's quite rare, and my research I think is quite related to geopolitics because I study China's economic reform. Even though you will think that it's more like economic history studies, but when I read these archives, my research finding is that even though it's just economic history, but it's all connected to the broad geopolitics background. For example, my research actually dates back to the China's debate in the early 20th centuries about how do they balance the state plan and then the market mechanism. Actually, this is not a new debate. Not only just happened after the 1970s, but it's continued at the whole 20th centuries. But why is only the market economic reform only happened successfully after the 1970s? I think it's quite related to the geopolitics. Because like China basically destroyed all the relationship with the socialist world, and then they had to recover their relation with the West. And then they wanted to make more business with the West, but the planned economic system cannot quickly react to the international market. So that's why this situation forced the Chinese government to reform their economic system. I mean, it's not all of the reason. I mean, it's just one of the factors that motivate China to continue the market reform. So that I want to say that the geopolitics is actually very important. Yeah.
And for my story, I mean, my story, I guess I can try to make it kind of rather short, because it's I mean, my engagement, I guess, with like geopolitics or world history is pretty long. I've been always like a very I just read a lot about Russian, history, and Russian history is deeply connected to European history and to world history in general. So I was always engaged with this topic. And then, I would say when I was 16, 17, I actually decided to become Russian diplomat. So it was a kind of dream of mine for some time. So I went, I don't know whether you know McGill University, which is, it is like the most prestigious international relations school in Russia. So all foreign ministers and all diplomats, they all graduate
in Moscow.
In Russia, they all graduate from McGill University. And but I also had this specific, I would say, upbringing, and I would say I was always like a very liberal person. So once I got into McGill University, which is it's more. It is a very professional place, but it also has like this idea of it's like they put a lot of emphasis on discipline, right? It's not just about knowledge, but it's all about how you persevere in those challenges that they specifically put on you. And of course, for me, my conception of university is something that you rather experience in the US, and I mean here in Germany, specifically at Freie Universität, it's something like a freedom of self exploration. So you want to explore ideas and topics. And of course, I decided to kind of quit McGill University and transfer just like to come to Germany to pursue education rather here. And for me, the topic of, and of course, then it's always interesting how once you move from one kind of society into another, you always find those interesting patterns in terms of you start observing, just kind of comparing and contrasting your identity to identity here. And of course, Russia, I think, it has been a notorious country for being like this type of Western and non-Western at the same time. I mean, some people you can make a very convincing argument that Russia is just part of the West. No matter like what you read in the newspapers right now, it's like an enemy of the West for many different reasons, right? Because of the culture, because of the just the integration, economic integration into European affairs, political integration as well. But at the same time, it has its own specific path, or like Russians would say, it's a civilization or what have you. So I mean, and then it's something that I got really interested while studying here, is this idea of how you can, conceptualize Russia and how Russia is perceived, would say, in the West, in the US, and how, of course, this whole, I would say, it creates like this very interesting dynamic, almost like a dance between Russia and the West / the US. I mean, the concept of the West is in itself a pretty interesting concept. So it creates like this very interesting dynamic, how it seems like there is intrinsic misunderstanding between the two, because this was, the topic of my master thesis research, where I try to show how the West just doesn't understand what Russia actually wants, and it creates just problems. It creates even more problems because it seems like what West doesn't understand is like it doesn't really understand what Russia wants to say. So there is like this problem of almost miscommunication or mistranslation, or just complete breakdown of I would say understanding between the two. And of course, conflict in Ukraine is something that I talk about a lot. I mean, I research it, and of course, it has like this, you can say, geopolitical dimension. So it's more than the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Of course, it's conflict between Russia and the West, or you could say the United States. So I think this is my, I guess, direct, interest in geopolitics. And of course, I also look at it. I also like in my research to combine the layers, because something that you can look at it as an individual. For example, I told you just right now my story, how for me it was always a struggle to understand whether Russia is part of the West or not. But you can also think about the conflict in Ukraine. It's something like this interplay of like a very complex identity formation, it seems, where people in the West, they would say, oh, Ukraine is the West and Russia is not, and Russia would probably like largely disagree with this, or something like this. So the concept of identity for me is something that I'm engaged now, like deeply, but of course it has like this again geopolitical dimension, because we also think about borders and construction of identities as something that divides countries or unites countries. If you can think about European Union, or just the concept of Europe as a whole, something that can enlarge and accept Ukraine, and Ukraine thus becomes part of Europe, but those can basically disunite people, right? Russia and Ukraine, for example. So something that's my interest in geopolitics.
Yeah. So thank you, Dimitri. Can I call you Dima? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Slavic way.
Yeah, you have Russian background. Both of us have Chinese background, and now we are studying and live in one Western country, Germany. So I think we have similar experience between China and the West. I think we have similar problems. Maybe from China's perspective, the Western people don't really understand China and the Chinese culture. There are a lot of misunderstanding and misperceptions. But from my perspective, I think Chinese don't really understand Western countries. So actually, we understand the Western countries from our own perspective. I think both China and the Western countries have a lot of experts. So as far as I know, in Germany there are so many China experts, and in China there are so many German experts, American experts. So of course they have sufficient knowledge about Western countries. They read a newspaper. They have communication with their Western counterparts. This is no doubt. But for me, what is more important is the perspective. I think for the Chinese people, we have information about Germany, but we don't understand the underlying logic of German government and the German society. So I have lived in Germany for more than 50 years. I think now I have a little bit more knowledge about German society. Now I'm trying to understand Germany from German perspective. So this is the situation. So both of us are talking about, actually 3 of us are talking about geopolitics. I think the most important geopolitical issue is the Russia-Ukraine war, and you are from Russia. I think today is a golden opportunity for 3 of us to exchange some ideas about this war, about the current situation, and the fundamental reason of this war, and the impacts and the influence. Next week, President Trump and President Putin will meet in Alaska. So I think this will be one probably historical moment. I don't know, I cannot predict the outcome of this meeting, but from my point of view, this is quite strange. Actually, for many Chinese people, this is quite strange. Trump's predecessor, President Joe Biden, was very hostile toward Russia. From my point of view, he has supported Ukraine with American military equipment, with American money, and even moral support. He has visited Kiev. But now it looks that President Trump is very friendly toward Russia. Okay, he has not criticized Russia for the war, but recently his position is more critical, I think. He has issued an ultimatum against Russia, and he has punished India for buying Russian oil. So this is a recent change, but for me, Trump is quite friendly to Russia, and he has criticized Ukraine. He has argued with Ukrainian President Zelensky in front of the entire world in White House. This has surprised a lot of people, especially many people with liberal mentality. So for me, it's quite difficult to understand that Trump is friendly toward Russia. For many people, this is a radical change from anti-Russia foreign policy of President Biden to the friendly policy toward Russia of President Trump. This is a radical change. How can we explain this change? So, what's your idea? Probably, I can explain my idea first. Then you have your idea, your own idea. I think this is about the American grand strategic tradition. American is not. I mean, the United States is now the only superpower of the world. But how can they maintain this position as the only superpower? They have to make sure that the Eurasia continent is divided. Because if the Eurasia continent is united, and the power and the resource are much more than the United States. I mean, the entire Eurasia continent. That's why the United States is always against any efforts of uniting Eurasia continent. That's why the US has participated in the 2 world wars and the Cold War. Because for World War I and World War II, it seemed that Germany will conquer the entire Europe. That's why America was against the efforts of Germany. I mean, both Imperial Germany and Nazi Germany. And after World War II, it seemed that the Soviet Union had the possibility to conquer the entire Eurasia continent. Because if you look at the map, Soviet Union has dominated Eastern Europe, I mean, during after World War II, and China, I mean, the People's Republic of China, after 1949, the Communist Party of China has conquered entire China, and the then leader of Communist China, Chairman Mao, has decided to pick side of Soviet Union. So it seemed that the Eastern Bloc or the Socialist Bloc has a possibility to unite the entire Eurasia continent. Actually, this is a geopolitical nightmare of the United States. I think the famous strategist of the U.S., Zbigniew Brzezinski, has written one famous book in 1997, Grand Chessboard. He has made it very clear, in order to maintain the supremacy of the United States, you have to make sure the diversification of the Eurasia continent. That means these countries cannot be united under any hegemon, okay? Yeah. Whether Hitler's Germany or Stalin's Soviet Union or today's China. It's unacceptable for the U.S. that one hegemon will emerge in the Eurasia continent. This has nothing to do with ideology. This is only related to geopolitics. For example, during World War II, the U.S. has worked together with Soviet Union, Communist Soviet Union. Actually, communism and Marxism are the ideological enemy of the American capitalism, but they don't care. So they worked together with Stalin, with the Communist Soviet Union against Germany. Germany actually is one part of the Western civilization. Okay, but they don't care. They don't care about ideology. So I think probably geopolitical motivation is more important than ideology. Okay, so this is my understanding. So during the rule of Biden administration, Russia has launched the war against Ukraine. It seemed that Russia has the possibility to conquer the entire Ukraine. Of course, Putin has failed from my perspective. But at that time, Russia was in a stronger position. That's why the United States has the motivation to weaken Russia. But today the situation is very different because Russia has failed to conquer the entire Ukraine, and Russia has lost or not, I think, both manpower and economic, both manpower and both militarily and economically. So Russia is now much weaker than 3 years ago. So now you cannot continue to weaken Russia, because if Russia is too weak, then the EU and China will be stronger. So this is not in the interest of the United States. I think then the Trump administration has the motivation to make a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. So this can avoid further weakening of Russia. Actually, a weak Russia is not in the interest of the United States. I'm not saying that the U.S. is a friend of Russia. I think Trump is doing this due to the consideration of the interest of the United States. He's not friendly to Putin. Okay, he's not the friend of Russia, but he has to make sure that the entire Eurasia continent is divided. Actually, this is a classical strategy of divide and rule. I think the U.S. has inherited this strategic tradition from Great Britain, from UK. So that's my understanding. So probably I'm very interested in your idea, your insights.
It's a very interesting take, to be honest. It's also like very counterintuitive, which I really like, because it's not something you hear a lot, and it's not something that I need to really think about it a little bit more in order to understand. Like, but it's definitely very interesting take if you think about if it's in the interest of the United States not to weaken Russia completely, but actually to kind of like raise it a little bit, like so it won't not collapse, but it won't completely disintegrate or what have you. It's actually a pretty interesting take. I mean, from my perspective, of course, we started with Trump, and just the question of what animates people, of course, like a very interesting one. When I look at Trump, when he started his presidency, I mean, first of all, I would say that, I mean, in general, I feel Trump still doesn't really understand Russia, and I don't expect anything from this meeting, because it seems like what he wants, and I made like a YouTube video in January, I remember, where I said, if Trump understands peace as a ceasefire, like Russians would never accept it, because for them, it's like, it doesn't solve any problems. It only creates problems in the future, because what they want, and it seems, at least how Trump understands peace, it's just this frozen conflict, something like similar to Korean scenario, right? And that's something actually you hear not from a lot of liberals and neoliberals as well. That's what they want. They want kind of to freeze the conflict and to have like this Korean scenario where, in 40 years, they can demonstrate that Ukraine will win not by force, but by example, right? By normative example, being better than Russia, while Russia will, economically weaken. So in this sense, what I'm trying to say, because of course there is Trump as a person, and from my personal study of American presidents, I mean, he has that much capacity. I actually think he doesn't really think that much about Russia at all, because it's like American president has like just the whole, he has to manage the whole world in a way. So he has like that much of an attention span for those type of things. And like also Trump is not really knowledgeable about Russia. I mean, he's someone who is probably reliant on people who give him information, people who talk to him, his analysts. So it's very interesting to look at like, of course we will know those things from archives, just to see who is actually responsible for for foreign policy towards Russia in American administration right now. Something, I guess, I mean, I'm not that knowledgeable to say for sure, but I think it's like an interesting thing to look at, because of course American bureaucracy is very powerful in the way it can, direct American president towards this or that policy goal or policy orientation. Because for now, what I see from Trump is like his, again, obsession with ceasefire. It's not really like a peace plan, how Russians envision peace. So there is still a lot of, I would say, misunderstanding. But also one thing you can also, especially when he became the president, I had like a strong feeling that he was probably guided by people who just, embrace this real politics thinking, like more Sharma style, almost, in a way that what they wanted to say, or, it's like, it's the end of American unipolar moment. So, we have to go and try to make friends with Russia, because that's the way to counter a line with China. And I think Mark Rubio, a couple of times, he said something along the lines that, maybe one day we can be allies with Russia. And, if you go back to 90s and like zeros, actually, I mean, all the way, I guess, to 2014, I mean, they kind of, both actually the US and Russia, officially, they wanted to be allies, strategic allies, but, in official rhetoric. I mean, it didn't work out, but it's very interesting to understand that there was very strong interest from Russian side to become partners with Americans. So this didn't really work out. My argument also very counterintuitive. I argue that like Russian war in Ukraine is not the war against the West, but it's actually Russian war towards integration into the West, into the future. So in other words, what they do with Ukraine, they're really, I mean, in my perspective again, they're really afraid of losing Ukraine because Ukraine is the last leverage in their geopolitical game to gain access to the West. Because if Ukraine leaves Russian orbit, then they have no capacity to impact anything in relation to the West. So if they lose Ukraine, they can lose the game in terms of they won't probably get in any type of integration into the future. So for them, what I argue, long-term perspective, when we think about 20, 30 years, what probably Russia wants to achieve is to say, hold on, you have Ukraine, you can integrate Ukraine, but only with Russia. So for example, if they have a deal where they say no to NATO, there will be some negotiation about, okay, but can Ukraine join European Union? And probably Russians would say, well, I mean, it can join European Union if you also have a free market open to Russia. So something like to use it as a more leverage in the future. So this is my argument, what this war is all about, actually. It's also something that very counterintuitive, because something that what you people, you find in the news is this concept that, war in Ukraine is war against the West or against Europe or against America, what have you. But I actually think it's way much more complicated than that. So this is my take on, I would say, on those recent developments.
I found that is very interesting when you say that Russian actually want to integrate to the West. I wonder if there's some internal or domestic discourse in Russian that they have this type of thinking, or
I think in general Russian domestic discourse is very elite driven, and of course Russian elites they can flip flop very easily. It's I would even guess that most people in terms of in elites they want to get access to the West again, because for them they send kids here and they have money here, and for them they didn't even expect that such a thing would happen, such a strong rupture in the system. So I would say there is this, and of course there has always been this internal debate in the discourse, whether Russia belongs to the West or not to the West. And it seems that, it doesn't have an end, to be honest, this discourse. It also very, I would say, contingent on how the West perceives Russia. Because what I also try to, so in my research, what I see this pattern, it's Russian Western relationships, they're really relationships. There's a lot of trauma there. There's a lot of things that are very emotionally charged. Because Russians always try to, get even what they're doing, in terms of their relationship with China or their relationship with North Korea. I always feel like what they want, they don't necessarily want. Of course, it's strategically beneficial for them, but they also want some approval from the West. Look at us, what we can do with other countries. So it's they always talk about the West in a way that's always in Russian psyche. And even if you turn on First Channel, they would always, have some news how great things in Russia are and how bad things in the West are going. They're always trying to think about how the West perceives Russia. So it never ends. So it's this idea of, and this is what, for example, I've heard a lot about China. China is really different because China is really self-sufficient. It doesn't need this external gaze. It doesn't need this understanding how the West perceives us, because we are self-sufficient civilization. It's something that I've heard a lot.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. I think this is about Russia's national identity. Yeah, for me, Russia belongs to neither the West nor the East. Actually, I have learned that some Russia scholars have the series of Eurasianism. For example, Alexander Dugin. He is promoter of Eurasianism. So I think Russia's position is quite unique. But your argument that the Russia-Ukraine war is one part of Russian efforts of integration into the West, I basically agree with this argument. I think we have to look at the history of Russia. So Russia, in the past, has always tried to expand toward the West. For example, Peter the Great and Ekaterina the Great, she has said a famous sentence: "If I can rule Russia for 200 years, the entire Europe will be under control of Russian Empire," something like that. So it means Russia has always the strong motivation of being one part of the Western civilization. But the history is interesting. I think when Russia had a problem with the West, for example, in 1856, I think there was a Crimean War between Russian Empire and France and Great Britain and Ottoman Turkey. Okay, Russia was defeated at that time, and then it was impossible for Russia to expand to the West, and then Russia turned toward the East, and then Russia conquered the Central Asia. So today I think for President Putin, Ukraine is really critical for Russia to be one part of the Western civilization. I remember Brzezinski has mentioned in his book Grand Chessboard, without Ukraine, Russia will be one Asia empire. So I think Russian leaders want to avoid this situation, whatever it takes. That's why Russia has sacrificed so much in this war. But it seems that President Putin is still determined to achieve his objective. He has not shown any sign of being stopped by the Ukraine resistance or whatever. So this is related to Russia's history and Russia's national identity. So I basically agree with your argument. So I want to talk about another point. Just now you have mentioned the idea of President Trump and maybe other advisors. For me, this is a fundamental question about the political or political science. This is about structure and agency. So actually, President Putin, President Trump, and President Xi, all of them are very important decision makers. But we have no idea about what they are thinking about the world. We don't know what they are thinking. What they are thinking. Okay, we don't know their ideas. So probably I prefer to analyze the situation from structural perspective. So if we want to understand today's situation, probably we can look at the history. I have recorded the history of the United States. The World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. And even before World War I, I want to mention one important historical event of Russia-Japanese War. Okay, this war was ended in 1905. Actually, Russia was defeated by Japan. That time, it seemed that Japan will conquer the entire Eastern Asia. Actually, this is not in the interest of the United States. That time, U.S. was not a great power like today, but that time U.S. had a grand ambition, and U.S. has made it very clear they don't want to see any great power which is able to dominate the entire Asia or entire Europe. When Japan defeated Russia, it seemed that Japan had the ability to conquer the entire Asia or Eastern Asia. So the United States decided to engage. That time, the president was Theodore Roosevelt. So he has coordinated the peace talk between Russian Empire and the Japanese Empire. So they have signed agreement in American city Portsmouth. So that means even before World War I, the U.S. has a clear strategy toward the Eurasia continent. They don't want to see any dominant great power in this continent, whether Paris or Berlin or Moscow or Beijing. They don't allow any dominant great power. Today, I think it's a situation. It seems that China will have the possibility to dominate Asia. America will not allow this happen. That's why we are talking about a new Cold War or Cold War 2.0. I think in order to compete against China, the U.S. wants to make sure that Russia is not the airline of China. So that's why Trump is trying very hard to improve the American-Russia relationship. Maybe Ukraine will be sacrificed. Who knows? But I think Trump does not care about Ukraine or Russia. He cares about only the interest of the U.S.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. And also just maybe linger a little bit on the point that you mentioned about the agency structure debate, because I mean this is how I would say got like seriously interested in IR, because I also started by like structural analysis. But then the more I did this type of analysis, the more I got, I mean, I guess unsatisfied with the with some things, because I felt it didn't allow me to maybe explore further, explain certain things that, again, for example, in relation to Russia and the West, the structural analysis has like problems explaining like this duplicity, right? This idea that Russia is certainly kind of part of the West and not really the West. So like this gray zone, I was like, and then of course, I mean, I played a little bit with normative ideas, with constructivism, and I also it wasn't very satisfactory for me. So then what I've been doing, I guess, for the last 3-4 years, is just I applied like very, I would say, post-structural theories to IR. And so this is where my, I would say, background comes from in relation to theory and methods. So I always like to play with different levels of analysis, because I also think, the way it's like, the human mind doesn't really, when we exist, we do not split neatly, the world in those categories. We have like always this like different levels interacting all the time. So this is why I think it's also, I mean, it's important for me. Sometimes I do try to actually, and I do try to understand the minutiae of world politics, try to imagine how world politics works during, negotiations, or how, for example, if you look at like American presidents, which is like one of the most documented topic, I would say, in human history, how they actually work on a day-to-day basis. It also it definitely gives you certain understanding of how things might work. Again, you read the history and you see the certain patterns, and for example, certain patterns in American bureaucracy, they remain the same despite different presidents. So something that it's important to keep in mind. But coming back to specifically, this case of preventing any hegemon from ruling Eurasia, I think certainly, I mean, America certainly has also intrinsic, I would say, intrinsic it doesn't want any hegemon anywhere, to be honest. It wants to be hegemon, it seems, everywhere. So it's also, for me, there is also like this concept of, which is very connected actually to the concept of the West, why the concept of the West is so interesting, because, I mean, the West seemingly, I mean, the end goal of the West is to become the world, right? I mean, this is how the concept of the West actually evolves in a way. Of course, once it finds like the friction points, like when you have like confrontation now, it tries to portray, you know, like China is not the West, Russia is not the West. But of course, if you go back to the 90s, I mean, the concept of the West was seemingly like the West should go everywhere, because the West was something that was almost synonymous with globalization, open markets, of course, liberalism and stuff like this. So it's something like a very interesting phenomenon in terms of how Americans perceive the world. And of course, eventually Americans want to dominate just the whole globe. And not only globe, they also want to dominate, I feel, the minds of every country, every nation. This is ultimate, I would say, dream is just like to be like those master designers, right? And I think like both Russia and China, in this way, they understood this. I mean, if you go and listen to Putin in Munich, I mean, he basically says something along those lines. You know, you're trying to be the masters of the whole globe, so, and we do not allow it here, so to speak. We can draw the border, and you know, we want to preserve our own way of being, right? Our own way of existing. I think the same is true for China, where China doesn't want to allow like this kind of foreign type of thinking, kind of just you know, permeate your own country, so to speak. So this is like, for me, it's interesting again. I know I'm just ranting a little bit about, I guess, identity formation and how it's. I mean, I certainly agree with you that they do not want hegemon in the Eurasia, but I also think they want to be just hegemons everywhere. So it's also something. And of course, Trump is actually a very good example of that, because if you listen to how Trump talks and speaks, like the whole idea that, you know, America is just this pinnacle of, you know, human civilization, it's just very interesting again to observe. So I don't know whether it like specifically answers your question. Yeah.
I mean, when you mentioned China's perspective, or if China care about West, I mean, for me, I do think China care about West, even though, you know, currently, in the domestic Chinese media or discourse, they can see that they're always trying to emphasize that we have our Chinese model. I mean, China, we don't care about how West think about us, but I think that actually means that China does think, because they want to show we have confidence. And I'm a historian. I only have like historical studies background. I mean, IR relation or the international history is on part of my courses during my bachelor and master studies. But, you know, I still am different that with both of you, because I don't really study a lot like AR theories, but according to my experience to study modern Chinese history and contemporary Chinese history, I feel that actually the Chinese, since the 20th century, the Chinese government or the Chinese intellectuals did care a lot about how Western government or how the Western intellectuals think about China, because during the early 20th centuries, there is a trend that they want to modernize China, or modernized that time means Westernization. They want to make China like more like a modern country, and then to adapt the democracy politics. And unfortunately, that time like China didn't have a very strong the state capability to, you know, to continue like with a market economy, or like Nazi Germany, like the National Socialist, that China wasn't able to do this. But of course, like finally, the Communist Party win, and then they start to apply the planned economy. But then that time, but that's another story. And when you mentioned that during the Cold War, I'm a historian. I read some like historians' research, because historians always, you know, review some details actually at the beginning of before the Cold War, like during the 1955, actually, like the American and the US and the Russian, they actually had some meetings. They decided that American just is the superpower, and then the Soviet Union actually they are the the number one state, the number one power for the Eastern Europe, and then the Great Britain take care of the Eastern Europe, like Germany or France, and then China just the Asian's number one country. But that is actually the U.S. plan, and because these Chinese scholars read the U.S. archives and also some the Soviet Russians archives, and then he found this fact. And actually, that time, the Soviet Union has planned to join the IMF. And then they had to, save their gold in the IMF, and then the U.S. actually gave a lot of the compromise to the Soviet Union, said that you can put your money, this gold in Moscow. You don't have to put it in New York or in the other Europe city. And they forced, the U.S. government actually forced the Great Britain to give more gold, to lend more gold to the Soviet Union, actually to make that the proportion, I think they want to make the Russians save more gold, into the IMF, because Russian is the second superpower in the world, and then they don't want to see the Soviet Union save so less gold. So actually, I think that time the U.S. has the strategy is not really want to weaken Soviet Union. They actually want to improve Soviet Union's position in Europe and even in the globe. So I think it's also quite confusing when you use when you apply that the Americans' traditional grand strategy into Europe. They don't want to see a superpower, but how do you explain this? Like they actually planned to improve the Soviet Union's position, but then finally this plan didn't work because there's so many struggles and misunderstandings, because the Soviet Union think the U.S. intervened too much about East Europe. The Soviet Union's idea think because they intervene too much about the election in East Europe, and American actually criticized a lot about this. Also, the Stalin made some speech inside the Soviet Union that we still have to fight with imperialism. And when the U.S. hear this, and then they actually thought that Stalin actually want to launch another war. So that's basically scholars' research about how the another origins of the Cold War. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I think the history is full of paradox, contradictions, and puzzles. So I'm trying to understand the American foreign policy. For me, Trump's foreign policy toward Russia is inconsistent with Biden's. So I'm trying to understand that. But I'm thinking about the possibility. If Trump continues Biden's foreign policy, that means U.S. will continue to support Ukraine in fighting against Russia. I think probably Russia will be defeated, militarily. I'm not talking about a nuclear war. I'm talking about a conventional war. If Ukraine received powerful weapons from Western countries, like Taurus missiles, like other powerful weapons, I think it's possible that Russia will be militarily defeated. And then what will happen? And I think then China and the EU will be much stronger. Can you imagine Belt and Road Initiative during Soviet era? Before 1991. Can you imagine China's Belt and Road Initiative in Eurasia continent? No way. Zero possibility, because Central Asia and other parts of Eurasia continent was under the control of Soviet Union. Chinese have no any possibility to launch any large infrastructure initiative in Eurasia continent. But now Russia has been weakened, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Okay, so if Russia is defeated in this war, China will become much stronger, and Europe will become much stronger and, of course, more independent from the United States. This is not what the U.S. wants. And the number one enemy, or maybe this is not a proper word, I mean the biggest strategic competitor of the U.S. is China today. Mm-hmm. I think the U.S. wants to make sure that Russia will not be the friend or junior partner of China. They want to avoid this possibility. So that's why I think the American foreign policy toward Russia is actually consistent. It's one part of the big picture. I mean, the grand strategy of the U.S. They just want to make sure that the Euro-Asian continent is divided. Okay, they are not naturally hostile toward Russia or China or Germany. No, they just want to make sure this continent is divided. They want to prevent any hegemon from emerging in this continent. Okay, I mean, I don't know. I think what is most important. I mean, everybody is talking about the summit meeting between Trump and Putin next week. But I'm thinking about this situation from a grand strategic perspective. I think the outcome will be very possible that U.S. will make a deal with Russia, because now the situation, I mean the strategic situation for the U.S. is absolutely 100% clear. They have to concentrate on China. They cannot waste their resources in Europe. If the Russia-Ukraine war continues, I think the U.S. will be forced to support Ukraine and European airlines. This is not in the interest of the U.S. They want to focus on Asia. Okay, that's why they Trump 1.0 has made the Indo-Pacific strategy in 2019. I remember it very clear. On June 1st, 2019, Pentagon, I mean the Department of Defense of the U.S. has published its Indo-Pacific strategy report. But it's just a paper. So now they want to take action. But how can they take action? They have to make some compromise with Russia. So what does strategy mean? Strategy means prioritization. So sometimes you have to make priorities. You have to give up something. So if you want to focus on Russia, that means you have to reduce your resource or presence in Europe. No choice. I think America has no choice but to reduce their responsibility and military presence in Europe. Actually, this is happening. It's
true. I mean, a few points. I think also when we think about the peace itself, I don't expect that anything happens from this summit. I mean, there probably will be some statements, and of course, it will be the center of world attention for a moment. But again, unfortunately, I think Trump, or at least the people who I would say drive the policy towards Russia, they still do not recognize like the Russian concerns with not wanting a ceasefire, because I mean I haven't seen any type of deals that include more than a ceasefire. So what they want is like this. They have like almost like this obsession with a ceasefire, and I haven't seen any other peace plans. I think who is the person who I'm trying to remember the person who designed this strategy towards Russia, and I think it was either this envoy Mankov or something like this, but it doesn't really matter, right? And then of course you need to think about like the Ukrainian agency. This is something that of course when you look at geostrategy or just strategic thinking. It's something that, in this particular case, I do not think like they can really force Ukraine to actually sign peace now. Also because you have the involvement of Europeans, right? Because now Europeans trying to be like almost like a counterbalance to Americans. If Americans if Americans abandon Ukraine completely, right? And now you have like this idea of buying American weapons Europeans buying American weapons and sending them to Ukraine. So again, for me, it's like of course the peace in Ukraine. I think a lot of like analysts like highlight this is like notoriously difficult because you have somehow to square all those parties. And you know, like for example, from my perspective, I mean the only solution is again, well, just integrate Russia and Ukraine into the West, because there was an example like this in the past, right? There was Germany and France, like seemingly way much more adversarial towards each other for, I mean, at least 150 years, so many wars, and you can still actually see it when you live in, I think in Europe and talk to, you know, Germans and French people. There is still some tension there. I don't think they love each other, and, you know, they like think about, like, especially just regular people, think about, you know, French people, Germans about French, or French about Germans, vice versa. They think about, you know, we are just all friends and brothers. I think there is like always like this tension, you know, between the two nations still. So, and of course, that's why I guess the peace is so difficult, because again, you need to somehow sell it to Ukrainians, and for Ukrainians to agree to anything that, you know, sells their sovereignty, which what Russians basically want. I mean, because, I mean, Russians will, you know, insist on basically saying no to NATO, which of course for Ukraine means saying no to their sovereignty. And then of course it starts all this, you know, and if, you know, if they say no to their sovereignty, the whole concept of, you know, the Western NATO expansion and the kind of the Western authority, and just like this idea that the West has this right to do so, of course, it kind of collapses. It's also very, I would say, big blow to the West as a concept itself. So I mean, again, that's why I do not expect much from that, from this summit, because I don't see how you can again reconcile all those parties at the moment. Yeah.
Maybe we have talked. We have discussed about more than 1 hour. Maybe it's time to
Yeah. Thank you for both of your perspectives. You know, actually, it's I think I actually learned a lot, and it actually answers my, you know, questions about like why the U.S. has different opinions or attitude towards Soviet Union in the earlier Cold War, and then compare with current today. Yeah, I think actually the U.S. want to focus on China now rather than just focus on in Europe, because they did because now apparently both Germany and Russia has been weakened by this Ukrainian war, but apparently China still, you know, like economic superpower still has the strong production ability and can actually already challenge the position and the superpower position of the US. So yeah, and it's a quite fascinating discussion. I actually would like this discussion to continue, but today we already run out of our time. So yeah, and
I mean, we have known each other. I think in the future maybe we can continue
more discussion. I think 1 hour is not enough to discuss these the broader geopolitics context. So yeah, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.